Skidmore, Missouri exists quietly on the map of the United States. It is a farming town in the northwest part of the state, surrounded by open land and long stretches of two-lane roads. Fewer than 500 people live here in 1981. Most families know each other by name. Many have known each other for generations. Serious crime is rare. When trouble happens, it is usually minor. A stolen tool. A bar fight that ends before midnight. The town depends on routine and familiarity. It depends on the idea that problems can be handled locally, without outsiders, without attention. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing, because what happens next shows how silence and power shape a community. For years, Skidmore carries a reputation that feels stable. People work. Children attend the same school their parents once did. Church services mark the calendar. The sheriff's office is small. Law enforcement coverage is limited, but most residents believe it is enough. They believe serious violence does not belong here. That belief erodes slowly. At the center of the tension is one man. His name is Ken Rex McElroy. He lives in Skidmore for much of his life. He is not an outsider in the traditional sense. He knows the town. He knows the people. And over time, many of them come to fear him. McElroy is accused repeatedly of crimes: theft, assault, arson, animal cruelty, threats, intimidation. He is suspected of far more than he is charged with. Complaints pile up. Police reports exist. Court cases move forward and then collapse. Witnesses recant. Evidence disappears. Juries hesitate. McElroy is charged more than 20 times over his adult life. He is convicted only once. The conviction does not change his behavior. Residents describe a pattern. McElroy targets people he believes have crossed him. He steals from them. He threatens them. He confronts them publicly. He brings a rifle with him. He stands close. He stares. He waits. The message is clear without words. Fear spreads in ways that do not show up in crime statistics. People stop reporting incidents. They avoid eye contact. They change their routines. They lock doors during the day. They tell their children to stay inside. Local authorities know McElroy by name. They also know the limits of their reach. Skidmore does not have the resources to fight prolonged legal battles. Witnesses are reluctant. Some are openly afraid. Others leave town altogether. McElroy understands the system. He hires skilled defense attorneys. He intimidates witnesses before trials. He shows up at their homes. He parks outside their businesses. He reminds them that he knows where they live. The justice system relies on participation. In Skidmore, participation collapses. One case stands out. In 1980, McElroy shoots a local grocer named Ernest Bo Bowenkamp. The dispute begins over a small issue. A bad check. A confrontation in the store. McElroy returns later with a shotgun. He fires at close range. Bowenkamp survives. This time, the evidence is strong. Witnesses see the shooting. McElroy is arrested. He is convicted of attempted murder. For the first time, it seems the pattern may break. But McElroy is released on bond while awaiting appeal. He returns to Skidmore. He does not keep a low profile. He goes back to the same places. He sits in the same bars. He parks in front of Bowenkamp's store. The message is unmistakable. Even a conviction does not remove him. The town reaches a breaking point. People talk quietly. Not in public meetings. Not in official settings. Conversations happen in kitchens. In barns. In parked trucks with the engine running. The same question appears again and again, always phrased indirectly. How does this end? On July 10, 1981, Skidmore gathers at the local bar. It is a warm summer morning. The bar opens early. It is a common meeting place. Farmers stop in after chores. Men gather to talk. News spreads quickly in small towns, and something feels different that day. McElroy arrives with his wife, Treno. He parks his truck near the entrance. He is armed, as usual. A rifle is visible inside the vehicle. He orders drinks. He sits. He watches the room. People notice. Tension is not loud. It does not announce itself. It sits in posture and silence. Conversations lower. Movement slows. Eyes track where McElroy goes. At some point, McElroy leaves the bar and returns to his truck. He sits in the driver's seat. Treno sits beside him. The engine is running. What happens next lasts only seconds. A shot rings out. Then another. McElroy is struck. He slumps forward. He is hit by bullets fired through the truck window. He dies at the scene. There are dozens of witnesses. The bar is full. The street is visible. People are standing nearby. Many see what happens. Many hear it clearly. No one calls the police immediately. When authorities arrive, they begin asking questions. They expect confusion, shock, fear. They encounter something else. No one claims to have seen who fired the shots. No one identifies a shooter. No one offers a description. No one steps forward later. Not that day. Not weeks later. Not ever. The silence is total. Investigators are stunned. A killing in broad daylight. In a public place. With witnesses everywhere. And nothing. The case draws national attention. Reporters arrive. Law enforcement from outside the county reviews the evidence. Ballistics confirm the cause of death. The weapons are never recovered. The witnesses remain silent. The legal system depends on testimony. Without it, there is no case. Prosecutors cannot file charges without witnesses willing to testify. They cannot compel a community to speak. The investigation stalls. Skidmore becomes known for what it does not say. Some describe the killing as vigilante justice. Others reject that label. There is no formal plan. No known group. No claim of responsibility. Only an act, followed by silence. McElroy's widow files a civil lawsuit. It goes nowhere. Without named defendants, the case cannot proceed. Over time, the town resumes its routines. Children go to school. Crops are planted and harvested. New families move in. Others move away. The bar remains open. The street looks unchanged. But something fundamental has shifted. Skidmore now carries a reputation. It is no longer just a quiet farming town. It is a symbol. A place where the formal justice system fails, and a community responds in its own way. Law enforcement professionals study the case. They note the breakdown of trust. They point to the repeated failure to protect witnesses. They highlight how intimidation erodes the rule of law long before a single shot is fired. The killing of Ken Rex McElroy is not an isolated moment. It is the final point in a long sequence of inaction, fear, and unresolved authority. No one is ever charged. The case remains officially unsolved. The silence holds. After the shooting, Skidmore does not erupt into chaos. There are no riots. No public celebrations. No official statements of relief. What follows instead is a controlled quiet. People go home. Doors close. Curtains are drawn. The town absorbs what has happened without discussion. Law enforcement remains present for days. State investigators arrive. They interview residents one by one. The questions are direct. Who fired the shots? Where were you standing? What did you see? Each interview produces the same result. Limited memory. Unclear views. Nothing definitive. This pattern is not accidental. It reflects years of learned behavior. For a long time, residents of Skidmore learn that reporting Ken Rex McElroy brings consequences. People who file complaints are threatened. Some are confronted in public. Others receive visits at night. Windows are broken. Property is damaged. Animals are harmed. The message is reinforced repeatedly. Speaking up leads to retaliation. The legal system offers little protection in return. Restraining orders are ineffective. Bond conditions are loosely enforced. Court dates stretch on for months. Witnesses asked to testify again and again, each time exposing themselves to risk. Over time, silence becomes a survival strategy. Investigators recognize this dynamic. They document it. But documentation does not produce testimony. Without cooperation, there is no path forward. The sheriff at the time acknowledges the difficulty. He states publicly that people are afraid. He also admits that fear alone cannot be used in court. The system requires evidence that meets legal standards. Outside observers struggle to understand the situation. From a distance, the case appears simple. A man is shot in public. Witnesses are present. Someone must know something. From inside Skidmore, the reality looks different. Many residents believe the system has already failed them. They point to decades of unresolved complaints. They remember court cases dismissed because witnesses withdrew. They remember seeing McElroy walk free after acts they believe were crimes. Trust is not restored quickly once it is lost. As weeks pass, reporters continue to arrive. They ask the same questions law enforcement asks. Why did no one speak up? How can an entire town remain silent? Some articles frame the story as collective action. Others suggest conspiracy. Residents respond carefully. Some refuse interviews. Others repeat the same phrases. They say they did not see anything. They say they were inside. They say they were not paying attention. A few speak off the record. They describe years of intimidation. They describe living under constant threat. They describe a sense of relief mixed with fear of consequences. None are willing to testify publicly. The Missouri State Highway Patrol conducts its own review. Agents go over timelines. They analyze the scene. They determine the approximate location of the shooter or shooters. Multiple firearms appear to be involved. Still, no arrests are made. The legal standard remains unchanged. Probable cause alone is not enough. Prosecutors need witnesses who will take the stand. As months turn into years, the case becomes static. It exists as a file. It is revisited periodically. Each time, the result is the same. No new evidence. No cooperation. No charges. The story of Skidmore begins to change in the public imagination. It is no longer just about one killing. It becomes a case study. Law schools discuss it. Criminal justice programs analyze it. Sociologists examine it as an example of informal social control. The question shifts from who pulled the trigger to why the system failed before the trigger was ever pulled. Ken Rex McElroy's history becomes central to that analysis. Records show a pattern that spans decades. Complaints begin in his teenage years. They continue into adulthood. Each incident follows a familiar arc. A crime is alleged. Charges are filed. Witnesses initially cooperate. Pressure builds. Testimony weakens. Cases collapse. This pattern teaches a lesson. Legal accountability is inconsistent. Intimidation works. McElroy is rarely jailed for long periods. He spends more time free than incarcerated. Each release reinforces his reputation. Some residents describe him as untouchable. Others describe him as protected by loopholes. The reality is less dramatic but more damaging. The system lacks the tools and resources to counter sustained witness intimidation in a small community. The attempted murder conviction of 1980 briefly disrupts this pattern. It suggests the possibility of consequences. But McElroy's release on bond undermines that perception. When he returns to Skidmore, armed and visible, the message to the community is clear. Even conviction does not mean removal. This moment matters. It is not just a legal detail. It is a turning point in the town's collective psychology. The belief that the system can eventually work gives way to the belief that it cannot. That belief shapes behavior on July 10, 1981. Investigators later note the absence of panic after the shooting. Witnesses do not scatter. There is no immediate chaos. This suggests that the event, while shocking, is not entirely unexpected. That does not mean it is planned in any formal sense. There is no evidence of a meeting. No evidence of coordination. But there is evidence of shared understanding. The understanding is this: the threat has reached a point where formal solutions are no longer trusted. This understanding is never spoken aloud in court. It exists only in private spaces. It exists in decisions not to speak. The silence after the shooting is not passive. It is active. It requires cooperation. It requires discipline. It requires a shared sense of risk. Breaking that silence would mean standing alone. As years pass, new residents move to Skidmore. They hear the story indirectly. It is told cautiously. Details vary. Some emphasize McElroy's crimes. Others focus on the shooting itself. Some avoid the topic entirely. The event becomes part of the town's identity, whether residents want it or not. Law enforcement agencies continue to reference the case in training materials. It illustrates the limits of policing without community trust. It also illustrates the danger of allowing intimidation to go unchecked. The case prompts discussions about witness protection, rural law enforcement funding, and prosecutorial discretion. But those discussions happen elsewhere. They do not change what happened in Skidmore. The town remains small. Resources remain limited. Ken Rex McElroy is buried. His widow eventually leaves the area. Life continues. But the absence of resolution lingers. It shows up in how people talk about authority. It shows up in how they view outsiders. It shows up in the way certain topics are avoided. For some, the shooting represents a failure of the justice system. For others, it represents the consequences of that failure. There is no official conclusion. The case remains open. The killing of Ken Rex McElroy does not close a chapter for law enforcement. It opens a long period of uncertainty. The case file remains active, but inactive in practice. Investigators return to it periodically, often prompted by anniversaries or renewed media attention. Each review reaches the same conclusion. Without witnesses, there is no path forward. This outcome forces institutions to confront uncomfortable limits. In the American criminal justice system, crimes are not solved by certainty alone. They are solved by evidence that can survive a courtroom. Physical evidence establishes what happened. Witness testimony establishes responsibility. In Skidmore, the first exists. The second does not. Ballistics confirm McElroy is killed by gunfire from outside his vehicle. The trajectory suggests shots fired from behind and to the side. Investigators determine that more than one weapon may be involved. This implies more than one shooter or at least more than one firearm present. That determination, however, remains inconclusive. No weapons are recovered. No shell casings are definitively linked to a suspect. The truck is examined. The scene is documented. Photographs are taken. Measurements are recorded. The technical work is thorough. It is not enough. The absence of cooperation becomes the defining feature of the case. This absence is not random. It reflects a breakdown that occurs long before July 1981. To understand that breakdown, investigators and researchers look backward. They examine how McElroy interacts with the system over time. They examine how often complaints are filed and withdrawn. They examine the conditions under which intimidation flourishes. One factor stands out. Rural justice systems operate with fewer layers of protection. Witnesses often live near defendants. Officers know residents personally. Prosecutors handle many cases with limited staff. Court delays stretch resources thin. In this environment, intimidation does not require secrecy. It operates in plain view. McElroy uses that visibility to his advantage. He does not hide his weapons. He does not avoid public spaces. He confronts people openly. This behavior sends a signal that legal consequences are unlikely and that retaliation is immediate. Over time, this signal reshapes behavior. Reporting declines. Cooperation weakens. Informal warnings replace formal complaints. The system becomes reactive instead of preventive. By the time McElroy is convicted of attempted murder in 1980, the damage is already done. The conviction arrives too late to rebuild trust. His release on bond reinforces the perception that consequences are temporary. After his death, some ask whether earlier intervention could have prevented the outcome. The question remains hypothetical. The record shows multiple missed opportunities, but no single decisive failure. The responsibility is distributed across institutions. Local law enforcement lacks resources. Prosecutors lack cooperative witnesses. Courts follow procedural rules that limit detention before appeals. Each element functions within its legal boundaries. The result, however, is systemic failure. Skidmore becomes a reference point in academic and professional discussions. Criminologists analyze it as an example of informal social control. Legal scholars discuss it in the context of vigilantism, though that term remains contested. Many residents reject the label outright. They do not describe the killing as an organized act. They describe it as an endpoint, a moment where accumulated fear reaches a threshold. The distinction matters. Vigilantism implies intention and ideology. What happens in Skidmore appears less structured. There is no manifesto, no claim, no justification issued publicly. There is only silence. That silence complicates the narrative. It prevents definitive conclusions. It also protects the town from legal repercussions. Without testimony, no one can be charged. Without charges, there is no trial. Without a trial, there is no official record assigning blame. The legal system stalls. Media coverage evolves over time. Early reporting focuses on the shock of the event. Later coverage shifts toward analysis. Articles examine McElroy's criminal history. They quote residents who speak anonymously. They question how an entire town can refuse to cooperate. Some portray Skidmore as lawless. Others portray it as victimized. Neither portrayal captures the full picture. Residents continue to live with the consequences. Some feel relief that McElroy is gone. Others feel unease about the precedent set. Many feel both at once. The presence of the case in popular culture adds another layer. Books are written. Documentaries are produced. The story is retold, sometimes with nuance, sometimes without. Each retelling risks simplifying complex dynamics. Law enforcement officials involved in the original investigation maintain their position. They acknowledge understanding the fear residents feel. They also emphasize that understanding does not equal endorsement. The rule of law depends on participation. When participation collapses, outcomes become unpredictable. The Skidmore case highlights a paradox. Communities demand protection from the justice system. The justice system demands cooperation from communities. When trust erodes on either side, both fail. This dynamic extends beyond one town. Similar patterns appear in other rural areas and urban neighborhoods alike. Witness intimidation is not unique to Skidmore. What makes Skidmore unusual is the completeness of the silence. In most cases, someone eventually speaks. In Skidmore, no one does. The reasons are practical as much as psychological. Naming a shooter would isolate the witness. It would make them a singular target. In a town of a few hundred people, anonymity is impossible. Witness protection programs exist, but they are rarely used in cases without clear suspects or organized crime involvement. Relocating an entire family is costly. Offering protection after the fact does not undo years of vulnerability. Residents weigh these realities quietly. As decades pass, the likelihood of resolution diminishes. Memories fade. Witnesses age. Some die. Physical evidence degrades or is lost. Even if someone were to speak now, the evidentiary challenges would be significant. The case transitions from an active investigation to a historical example. This transition raises questions about accountability. If a community collectively withholds information, who bears responsibility? The law is designed to address individual actions, not collective silence. Skidmore exists in this legal gap. For some residents, the event becomes something not discussed with outsiders. For others, it becomes a cautionary tale told carefully. New generations grow up hearing fragments, not full explanations. The town itself does not freeze in time. Economic pressures continue. Farms consolidate. Population shifts. Schools face funding challenges. These changes occur alongside the lingering presence of the case. The shooting of Ken Rex McElroy becomes part of local history, but not local conversation. From a criminal justice perspective, the case forces a re-evaluation of assumptions. It challenges the idea that the presence of witnesses guarantees accountability. It challenges the notion that legality alone ensures legitimacy. When legal processes repeatedly fail to protect participants, alternative behaviors emerge. Those behaviors may not align with the law, but they arise from lived experience. This does not excuse violence. It explains conditions. The distinction is essential in understanding Skidmore. Explanation is not justification. Analysis is not approval. The American justice system is built on principles of due process. It prioritizes rights, even when outcomes frustrate communities. In Skidmore, those principles operate as designed. The consequences, however, reveal gaps between theory and reality. The town becomes a lesson rather than a case. Law enforcement training materials reference it as an example of what happens when intimidation outpaces protection. Prosecutors cite it when discussing witness cooperation. Scholars include it in discussions of community responses to chronic offending. Yet none of this retroactively resolves the case. The shooting remains unsolved. Officially, it remains a homicide with no named suspects. Skidmore remains quiet. The legacy of Skidmore does not reside in court records. It resides in what the case exposes about the limits of law, especially in places where institutions are thin and relationships are dense. It shows what happens when formal systems rely on participation that fear slowly removes. In the years after the shooting, no official reform follows directly from the case. There is no new statute named after Skidmore. No federal inquiry reshapes rural policing overnight. The impact is quieter and slower. It unfolds through study, caution, and reference. Law enforcement agencies use the case as an internal lesson. It appears in training discussions about witness intimidation. It is cited when explaining why some communities refuse cooperation. Officers are taught that trust, once lost, is difficult to recover and impossible to demand. Prosecutors view Skidmore as a warning. They see how repeated delays and dismissed cases weaken credibility. They recognize that each failure compounds the next. By the time a serious charge succeeds, the damage may already be irreversible. The justice system operates on precedent, but communities operate on memory. In Skidmore, memory carries more weight than procedure. The town itself never issues a collective explanation. There is no public reckoning, no apology, no defense. Residents continue to insist, individually and collectively, that they did not see who fired the shots. That statement remains legally sufficient and socially reinforced. Outsiders often ask whether the town feels guilt. The question misunderstands the dynamic. Guilt implies wrongdoing acknowledged. In Skidmore, the dominant emotion is not guilt. It is resignation. Many residents believe the outcome is inevitable, not chosen. They believe the conditions lead to the result long before the act itself. This belief does not require agreement on who pulled the trigger. It only requires agreement on what failed beforehand. The case also forces a deeper examination of how power operates outside formal authority. Ken Rex McElroy holds no office. He wears no uniform. He carries no badge. Yet his influence shapes behavior more effectively than official warnings. That influence is rooted in credibility. Not legal credibility, but practical credibility. When threats are followed by action, they become believable. When reports are followed by inaction, they lose force. Over time, residents calibrate their behavior accordingly. The American prison system enters the conversation indirectly. McElroy spends time incarcerated, but never long enough to disrupt his influence. Short sentences, release on bond, and pending appeals allow him to return repeatedly to the same environment. This cycle reveals a gap between punishment and protection. Incarceration punishes past behavior. It does not always prevent future harm, especially when it is brief or inconsistent. For communities like Skidmore, the prison system feels distant and unreliable. The timeline of appeals and hearings does not align with the immediacy of threats. Protection delayed becomes protection denied. After McElroy's death, some residents express concern about copycat behavior. They worry about setting a precedent where violence replaces due process. Others dismiss that concern, arguing that the circumstances are too specific to repeat. In the decades that follow, no similar event occurs in Skidmore. The silence does not expand into a pattern of extrajudicial violence. This fact complicates simple narratives. It suggests that the shooting is not embraced as a model, even by those who feel relief. The town does not become lawless. It becomes cautious. The story persists because it resists resolution. There is no confession. No deathbed admission. No recovered weapon. Each year that passes reduces the likelihood of closure. The absence of resolution invites interpretation. Some frame the event as community justice. Others frame it as a collective moral failure. Still others treat it as an anomaly that defies categorization. From a documentary perspective, restraint matters. Facts are limited. Conclusions must remain grounded. What can be said with certainty is narrow but significant. A man with a long history of alleged violence and intimidation is shot and killed in public. Dozens witness the event. No one identifies the shooter. The legal system fails to produce accountability, either before or after the killing. Everything else exists in interpretation. The Skidmore case highlights how justice depends on more than laws and prisons. It depends on trust, safety, and the belief that participation will not bring harm. When that belief collapses, formal systems lose their authority. This insight extends beyond rural Missouri. It applies to any environment where witnesses fear retaliation more than they trust protection. It applies in neighborhoods, workplaces, and institutions where silence becomes adaptive. The American prison system is often evaluated by numbers. Arrests, convictions, sentences, recidivism rates. Skidmore reminds us that absence also matters. The absence of reports. The absence of testimony. The absence of belief. These absences do not appear in statistics, but they shape outcomes. For policymakers, the case raises difficult questions. How do you protect witnesses in small communities? How do you intervene early without overreaching? How do you balance due process with preventive detention? There are no easy answers. What is clear is that ignoring chronic intimidation allows it to metastasize. By the time violence occurs, options narrow dramatically. Skidmore does not offer a solution. It offers a warning. The town continues to exist. Its population fluctuates. Its economy changes. New residents arrive with limited knowledge of the past. The story fades and resurfaces in cycles, often driven by media projects. Each retelling risks distortion. Some emphasize McElroy's crimes. Others emphasize the killing. Responsible accounts hold both realities without merging them into a single moral judgment. The restraint shown by many residents persists. They do not seek attention. They do not attempt to justify the event publicly. They maintain the same position they hold from the beginning. They did not see who did it. The law accepts this answer, even if it finds it unsatisfying. In the end, the Skidmore case forces a confrontation with an uncomfortable truth. Justice systems are only as strong as the protection they provide. When protection fails repeatedly, people adapt in ways the law does not anticipate. This adaptation is not orderly. It is not principled. It is reactive. Understanding that reality does not mean endorsing it. It means acknowledging that systems must address fear as seriously as they address crime. Skidmore remains a quiet place. The bar still stands. The street looks ordinary. There is no marker at the site of the shooting. No plaque. No memorial. The absence is deliberate. The case remains unsolved, not because the truth is unknowable, but because it is unreachable through formal means. Silence, once established, sustains itself.